To market sense, let's unpack that market picture, starting off, of course, in the far east. Markets extending the previous day's gains in Asia this morning, with investors turning their attention back to that China-US trade and a planned meeting between the country's leaders later this month. Donald Trump's decision to then drop the threatened tariffs on Mexico after a last-minute immigration deal last week then sparked some relief across the trading floor and led to hopes that the row between Beijing and Washington could also end with some sort of agreement. The gains, which follow another healthy Wall Street performance, are much needed since the US president shocked markets last month by hiking levies on $200 billion of Chinese imports, blaming backsliding over their long-running trade talks. Now, Tokyo's Nikkei was 0.3% better off today, so managing to go up to 21,204 points. In the Hang Seng, that went up 0.8% as well, while the Shanghai Composite was the biggest jumper today, nearly 3,000 points, going up 2.6%. Now, U.S. stocks extended their recent climb on Monday, with the Dow reaching its longest daily winning streak in 13 months. That's after the United States dropped those plans to impose the tariffs on Mexican goods and following a couple of multi-billion-dollar deals. Now, the Dow Jones Industrial picked up 0.3% to close out at 26,062 points. The S&P 500 also gaining 0.5% there, 2,886 points. The Nasdaq Composite moving up 1%, 7,823 points. Let's quickly check in on the remainder of the market picture now. For now, we start off out in Europe, and it seems like an all-green day. Of course, the sentiment from Asia, which has been positive, has clearly filtered through into the local and the European markets, so we are seeing some significance there. Of course, the trade row between China and the United States will certainly be an impact and something to watch out for. And if we take a look at the South African market as well, you also see some positivity coming through there. The JSE headed a whole lot higher, headed towards that 59,000 point mark, so certainly could be a better mark there. The industrials doing well, having seen Tencent do a whole lot better as well earlier in the day. The resource picture as well, much better, despite the gold counters headed a little bit lower, having seen that gold price as well falter just a touch. Continuing to check in then on the commodity space, the platinum counter, platinum itself going down to $804 an ounce and trading relatively stable at that mark. The price of oil stabilizing at around $62 a barrel, having gone all the way down to around 59 odd, and now stabilizing that figure. So that will certainly set some motion in place. And the currencies, 1476, so a much better stance for South Africa's currency, gaining around 0.5% as well today. So doing relatively better and perhaps taking in some sense of confidence from the trade scenario as risk on trade gets back into the picture. Now, here's a massive story for you. It's a story that has perhaps shaken the market, particularly over the last year. And in recent times, we've seen the likes of Steinhoff, of course, take on the market picture, and that has not been helping the market at all. The sugar producer and one of the largest in the world to produce glucose and starch, Tongaat Hewlett, is in a bit of a wobble. The situation there has, of course, brought on fears of irregularities when it comes to accounting and just how things were done by auditors on that front, where the CEOs perhaps stand, and just how far things have certainly gone. Well, Tongaat Hewlett yesterday decided to officially suspend trading on both the JSE and the London Stock Exchange. The company had a market cap of 2.2 billion rand by close of trade yesterday at around 13.21 rand a share at the close of trade. On average, they seem to be getting an average revenue of around 15 billion rand annually. Now, let's remember that the company itself, however, does have liabilities of around 14.6 billion rand. So you can clearly tell that it's not necessarily doing as well as one would have liked. Let's remember that there are quite a few issues in that sector that we will talk about a little bit in just a moment or two. If we continue to the next graph, you'll begin to see that the issues behind this, the reason why they've had this massive capitulation and have had to suspend their trading on the JSE and the LSE, was that they incorrectly counted land sale revenue with around 3.5 to 4.5 billion. So they're going to have to restate their financials as well then by around 3.5 to 4.5 billion rand. We'll get an exact figure from them hopefully soon enough. If the damage, of course, isn't a whole lot more than that, they must also reverse capitalized costs on cane routes and inventory and things like manufacturing as well. What that means is, of course, that they took on the cost of manufacturing things like cane into the asset price and ensure that that asset then was called differently. And it takes it out of the income statements and places that on the balance sheet, changing the value of the business and not necessarily just its expenses, meaning they undercounted their actual expenses. This is a dire situation and one that is bound to hurt the likes of Deloitte, who are, of course, their auditors and have been so for 15 years. They were also the auditors for Steinhoff, who have now, of course, capitulated and have seen themselves go down the drain in a very, very bad fashion. IRBA, the Independent Regulatory Board of for Auditors, has launched its own investigation into Deloitte's work, which has clearly then prompted quite a scare for Deloitte. Things aren't going well. Let's remember that KPMG, of course, was in a saga of its own, and now Deloitte just seems to be gathering steam and going in a similar direction. But PwC have, of course, if you take a look at the next slide, been put in place to perhaps investigate certain practices which could impact past reported financial information. This could certainly just mean that the way that things have been stated in the financial results over the last year or so could certainly be misstated and could change the way things have been done, or practices which go back a little bit longer. And that may be the scenario that needs to be watched out for. How have things actually been over the last few years? Have they been disclosing things the same way? Because that is certainly going to be an irregularity on its own. This was the sentiment and the statement coming out of Tongaat Hewlett yesterday in their SENS announcement on the JSE, saying that whilst the board is conscious that some shareholders or potential investors would prefer to retain the ability to buy and sell shares, the board believes that the temporary suspension is in the best interests of shareholders as a whole. Does it take away perhaps the ability to trade in a share that you perhaps no longer like? Having sat at around 89 Rand odd a share in August last year, it's now sitting at around 13.21, and we could clearly see a massive capitulation happen a little bit later on. They are hoping to go back into listing or trading in October when they finally release their reviewed financial statements. But could that be a little too late? Could that be when we see a massive sell-off? Or could they get ahead of the news and perhaps fix things so that it's not just a massive sell-off in that share price for Tongaat Hewlett? Continuing with the story very quickly, the questions need to be asked. How did these two men get away with it? Were they perhaps involved in this scenario? That is Peter Storia on the far right of your screen over there, and the former CEO of Tongaat Hewlett, and Murray Monroe is the former CFO of Tongaat Hewlett. Both men left before the AGM last year in August 2018, which is when the price of Tongaat Hewlett's shares stood at around 89 Rand a share, and has since capitulated 85% since then up until today's date. Storia himself made 13.5 million Rand in revenue, or rather in salaries and the likes, from the business last year, and 20 million the year before, including a 6 million Rand bonus. Earnings for the company earlier in February, they reported that their earnings would go down by 250%, a massive, massive decline, and they blamed that on sugar imports and the new sugar tax, which was, of course, implemented by National Treasury, which has seen them have a greater impact on proceedings. The company is also said to cut over 5,000 jobs. The scenario may be hurtful, but it's clear then that Tongaat Hewlett is hurting and is now another company facing maladministration, perhaps accounting regularity. A whole lot of sagas could certainly be to the fold here. Let's very quickly just check in on that share price as well. As you can see, things back in 2018, August 2018, the CEO and CFO announcing their departures back then. In October 2018, finally deciding to, of course, step down and officially leaving at that point. By February 2019, they had announced that drop in earnings of 250%, and in June 2019, admitting that their financials are indeed incorrect. In the space of August 2018 to today, that price has fallen 85%. What happens from here? We'll hopefully get a review and get a sentiment of exactly what happens. The likes of IRBA, the likes of PwC, of course, releasing some reports hopefully very soon, and we'll get a sentiment out of that. Let's unpack this a little bit more now, and we're joined by Sean Morrison, of course, at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. He's from IG South Africa and helps us perhaps unpack just the sentiment as how the market perhaps feels around this. Sean, thank you so much for the time. It's still another Steinhoff, right? It's still another story, and this might be getting a little bit worrisome for the market.
Yeah, I think it's the real problem here is that there's just been so many issues of corporate governance in South Africa. We've had Steinhoff, we've had issues with EOH. You know, there's a few of them, and now Tongaat. And the Tongaat, I mean, you know, suspending a share is quite serious. So we just need to see how deep the rot is.
Yeah. Does this, however, help them get ahead of the news, or is this a way of trying to run away from you know, the news cycle itself?
I think they're showing some accountability by actually taking, you know, suspending trade, stopping that sort of amplifying of, you know, sell side market participants while they get the ducks in a row. What's not encouraging is, you know, is how badly restated those results are going to be. We saw that, you know, after a couple of years, Steinhoff, you know, obviously that's a very complex corporate structure, more complex than the Tongaat, I'd think. But, you know, as soon as they released those delayed results, we saw that share price tanking once again. So it's nervous times because we don't know. Is it, you know, what happens next when they do relist? Do we end up with a, you know, an asset sale? You know, shareholders will have a lot of questions.
Yeah. This is happening a little bit too much for your liking, though, surely. And as market participants, you must be asking yourself, how exactly do we begin to trade if we can't trust things like financials, where, you know, we thought that those were cast in stone. Those were the, you know, the ironclad that we believed in.
Yeah, well, now they're suspended, so you can't trade them at all. You know, you just got to wait until October. Yeah, it's not, you know, it's further than just the issues of corporate governance. It's our gatekeepers, you know, Deloitte's second time implicated in two really big scandals. Well, not implicated, but they are the gatekeepers. They are supposed to sort of, you know, keep those books in check. Yeah, so, you know, there's also far-reaching, you know, consequences to the economy. Like you said earlier on, we've got 5,000 people that have now been given retrenchment notices, and that's, you know, that at the end of the day doesn't help an economy. You know, less consumers with, you know, with money to spend to help us grow the economy. We're sitting at an unemployment rate of 27.6% or whatever it is, and now we have issues like this.
Yeah. I mean, I can believe that Lwazi Bam, the CEO of Deloitte, is certainly going to be asking quite a few questions here exactly. They have decided, of course, to do away with the senior auditors that they have on that audit of Tongaat. So perhaps we'll get some sentiment as to what exactly has happened and perhaps a thorough investigation. So we'll continue to unpack that one. Sean, very quickly, just on the general market picture, seems that the positivity here is just on the relief that no tax or no tariffs rather are had between Mexico and the United States, and the hope then is that China and the United States can follow suit. Yeah,
so I think that was the initial catalyst, is the Mexican-US trade deal, but we also have if you look at the market movements today, you see it's broad-based gains, but it's led by the resource sector.
Yeah.
We also had some news that China is going to be sort of stimulating the economy or boosting sort of infrastructure spend. I think that has sort of helped the demand side, and we've seen a pickup in our resource stocks today. Specifically, not really the precious metals, but more the diversified resources, the guys that you know, mine a lot of base metals and things like that. The rand looking good. Nice to see it back below that 15 rand to the dollar mark. You know, I think that's also helping the banking, retail, and financial counters up on the day. So all in all, a good picture, but it is led by resource counters, and we just hope, you know, we'll have to see about the sustainability. We've been disappointed about trade talks in the past, and I'm sure there's a lot more surprises to come.
Yeah. Generally, overall, are you worried about that oil price? Does it perhaps hover and stay around $60 to $65 a barrel? You think that's still okay for the market? Is that where the market would perhaps like to see it?
Well, I'm much happier with it in the low 60s than in above 70, like it was a short little while ago.
Yeah.
You know, there's two factors at play here. You know, one is the supply side, which it looks like OPEC's going to extend those cuts. later on this month where they meet. I think it's the 20th of June. OPEC Plus, including Russia, who are supportive of that. But then you have the demand side. We have this ongoing trade war, and global growth is proportionate to the length of time it takes for a deal to be reached between the US and China. So that does threaten global growth and demand. And so I think hereabouts is a place where I like to see oil, and hopefully we could stabilize around these mid 60s to lower $60 per barrel. That's for Brent crude, that is.
Yeah. All right, Sean, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it there. Joining us live from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, Sean Morrison from IG South Africa.